matter who you are, where you are, what your choices have been, and what karmic timelines and contracts you have journeyed, the light is calling for the reunification of all aspects of life in this realm now. It is calling for the cleansing of all polarities. It is calling for the rising of all sacred heart centers now. All are being summoned home to the greater light now.
Hi, and welcome to Whole Soul Mastery's Live Well, Live Whole podcast series, where we inspire and empower wholeness and integration. I'm Marie Moeller, and I'm an author, a channel, and a host of these podcasts. And I'm back today with Paul Panzica to explore this adventure. I'd like to call it an adventure that we're on right now, Paul, because that helps to center us and to embrace the journeying we're all doing. But so yes, welcome to the adventure to our listeners. Thank you, Paul, for joining me today. And I'd like to hear just where you are, because there's so much change going on, and we're all having experiences of that change through our own lenses, our own perceptions, filters. And then there's a greater umbrella. I believe there's a greater plan that's guiding things, but boy, things are interesting out there and sometimes in here. I mean, sometimes in here, it can get really interesting. So please share a little bit where you are in those changes.
Well, thank you first for inviting me back again. It's a pleasure to speak to you, of course. The last time we spoke was in October. Well, I think, and maybe around the fall, sometime around the fall, I think we did. And things have changed quite a bit since that last meeting. And you know, with all of the chaos that's happened in the world, and all of the let's say predictions and all of the experts throwing in their advice as to how this is all going to play out. I've learned this every single time, but I always get burned. You know, I always follow the pundits and the experts and those who are allegedly in the know, and it never turns out the way that the experts are predicting, or the enlightened people are predicting, so to speak. People that are getting the intel, the people that are sharing the information. We get all this information, we put it together, and we go, yeah, it didn't turn out the way that we all expected it to turn out. So I wrote an essay on this, and this was the last entry on my webpage regarding this. It was looking at all of the information and all of the drama that's playing out at this point. And if you really kind of look at it from the political perspective, it's just a quagmire. It's just you really have to understand that this is Machiavellian politics being played out to the nth degree. So you know, everything can be manipulated. Everything can be distorted. So they really have to break it down to say that what information or stream of information can we gather that cannot be distorted, that cannot be subverted. And then that goes back to this idea that there is information that is subjective, and then there's this information that is what we would say more objective.
Right.
And the more objective information then comes from higher sources, and what these higher sources are giving us, and where do these higher sources come from? And for many people, this comes from through different portals. It comes through, in some instances, channeling or automatic writing, or visions or dreams, and all of those resources. And I have a number of people now that have come forward to speak to me directly, who have been patients of mine or been acquaintances of mine, who tell me they do exactly the same thing that you're doing now, that they have spirit guides and that they're giving them information. They're channeling information from higher resources. And you know, those higher resources and those higher sources are saying the same thing that you're saying. My visions are telling me the same thing that you've been saying all along, but my egotistical mind can't accept it. wait, how can this possibly manifest? So another source that, at least as far as we know, the deep state can't manipulate. I mean, they might try. I mean, certainly they seem to be manipulating timelines. That's a possibility with all of the technology they can develop. But I don't think what they can manipulate are the movements of the heavens. That's outside of their range of capabilities. So we still have the astrology to look at. And I have looked at it. Now, I fault myself because of this, because as we were moving towards certain dates, and as we were expecting certain transformations or transitions, all this amount of information was coming in as to how that would all play out. And we were looking at all kinds of scenarios that would have involved political intrigue and military maneuvers and, you know, dramatic events that would be punctuated by violent measures and all of these other things. And I was getting this information from many different sources, including people who read the charts, people who read the astrology. And, you know, we came to a focal point and it didn't happen. You know, it didn't happen. At least it didn't happen from our perspective. There might have been things going on behind the scenes, but it didn't happen. So what I did is I looked at the charts, and you can do this. It's an interesting thing to do. Is if an event happens and you're perplexed, one of the things that you can do is you can look at that date. And the date that in question that I had was January 20th. I'm like, what happened? Right? So when you look at it from a forensic perspective, when you look at it from what the energies were actually occurring on the day, it was not what everyone had predicted. It was clearly the signature of the day was clearly stated that there was no violence that was going to erupt on that day. There was no chaos that was going to erupt on that day. That there was something that was manifesting. And when you look at the chart, you know, originally when I look at these charts, the complexity of the charts, you know, if you're looking at all of the known bodies, the celestial bodies are there. It's like looking at a calculus problem. You look at it and you go, okay, that's the problem. But now I have to really put my head into this, and I really have to look at it, and I have to ask myself, you know, what does this all mean? And it takes a lot of meditation, a lot of contemplation, a lot of feeling your way through it. But what it showed, interestingly, on that date was exactly what we were told happened, which was that cooler heads prevailed, that certain plans were looked at and scrubbed, that there is a divine plan that is unfolding at its own pace, and that there's no reason to give up hope at this point, because this is the plan, this plan of transformation. And what it really invokes is something that I had said before, which was that we're going to be shown, and this is what the astrology is saying. This is not me saying this, because if it was me saying this, I'd say we're doomed. But I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that the astrology is demonstrating to us, as this year unfolds, as the season unfolds, that there is this manifestation of justice, and there is this manifestation of divine justice, and that the salvation is coming from millions of different points, and that it's all coming together through the light that you keep talking about and other people keep talking about, and that is manifesting at its own cadence. But the charts continue to demonstrate this through the season, that this transformation is indeed occurring, and it's going to occur. You know, the way of the logos is not a way of violence. The way of the light is not a way of violence. It's occurring in a new way. It's occurring in a way that is ascended, and it's occurring in a way that will, as this thing ends or finally manifests itself out, and I have no idea how long that's going to last. It will demonstrate to all who's paying attention, who's engaged in this process, and that's virtually all of us now at this point, that there is justice to the universe, and there is justice in this world, and it will play out according to the rule of law. That's the way they're taking, and it's quite amazing to see it unfolding. So again, as I vacillate between optimism and pessimism is that I can see that there is this divine plan. It is manifesting. It's hard to do this or see this when you're in isolation from everybody else, but it does seem to be manifesting and playing itself out. So at least I wanted to share that from what I've discovered over the last few months. Is that once again, you can't predict how this will manifest itself, but it will manifest. You know, we really can't predict all of them. But they always say the devil's in the details. So how those details play themselves out, I have no idea, but they are playing out. And I guess I can say that I always ask myself, have I seen any dramatic change? The answer is no, but then I say no. The answer is yes. I've seen tremendous amounts of change, which has happened, and quite frankly, I do see it, as you have mentioned before in some of your videos, things unraveling on the dark end of things are starting to unravel, and we are seeing tremendous changes amongst ourselves regarding our consciousness and regarding our capacity to analyze this and regarding our connections to the spiritual realm. These are all dramatically changing, just like you're saying in your videos.
Everything that you just shared is so powerful, and I think there are many who listen to these videos. Not everybody resonates because they don't want to get into the devil's in the details, right? There's a lot of people who, for whatever reason in their own journey, they want to look forward of what we're moving into and don't want to look at what's also closing out. You know, there's many different lenses through which we can see this particular timeline and what's playing out. You know, I personally am someone who believes that I do believe we have to see the duality game. We have to see the serpent, if we want to use that metaphor. We need to see the, devil's details of what we have not been able to see. When we have all ingested the poisoned apple, we've all ingested the propagandized apple that the serpent was passing around and has been making sure we all partake from in the conditioning of this realm. You know, God energy and the divine design is still here, but the serpent has woven its way in a 3D dimensional world of greater darkness and density, and it uses deception. You know, the snake doesn't come out there in the way we've been conditioned to expect to see the villain. You know, Snake's not wearing a big black cape and driving a big, dark van and tinted windows and anything sinister that you might want to add to that imagery, and says, and it's spray painted on the van, it's me, I'm the serpent, right? It doesn't operate that way. It infiltrates. It's very insidious. And because it's had thousands and thousands and thousands of years to perfect its craft in a creation of God's design, right? So I'm not saying that there is no God. No, God is everywhere. But the serpent has been trying to usurp the power of true creation through manipulation, because that's all it has. It can't create. It has to use other life force to make the choices, and it infiltrates. And so we have this in our consciousness, and I believe we need to be seeing more of this. How is the serpent operationalized in our culture? How has the serpent moved in all the different aspects of our lives, while we also have these beating heart centers inside us that are made in the image of God? We have the template of God inside us, and then the outpicturing that the serpent keeps manipulating, which is what some people, when you're unawakened, you take the outpicturing into the in-picturing, and then you're seeing in many ways through that distorted filter of the serpent's lens and filter on God's design. So when we feel somewhat conflicted, or we feel like we have the ego and then we have, the God essence inside us, we've been living in both since, the beginning of known time. And I would say known time, at least as far back as the history books give us allowance to know what time is, right? But there's timelines before timelines before timelines. And most people don't even have any consciousness about that, or any future timelines. So the Garden of Eden, that many of us have grown up many lifetimes hearing about, right? And just the frequency. See, I feel the Garden of Eden, and it still exists. It's not lost to us. It's not just a story. It's got a lot of the frequencies of what New Earth is to me and many people who can palpate this higher dimensional realm. The Earth, you could even say, in its original form, when she birthed into form, was this pristine, gorgeous Garden of Eden Gaia. And then when Adam and Eve, in the essences of the divine masculine and the divine feminine, when we were in that wholeness form, that oneness form, everything was provided, right? And that is the story. I mean, there are elements of truth in the biblical stories. It's a living map of energy. But God's energy is in the Bible. And so also from my perspective, there has been manipulations that the serpent has infiltrated a lot of that wisdom too. So you have books and texts, sacred texts that were omitted from the Bible, and things that were allowed to depict one understanding of a story or a parable, right? And maybe they have diverged a little bit even from the original messages, or there was jewels. I mean, that's like the wealth of God in those sacred texts. But we have to remember there's elements of the serpent in all of our lives. That's what a 3D dimension is, with the duality that exists here. And when they took a bite from the apple, especially from the last transmission, the way the guides were saying it, it was an interesting lens through which I could see this, I could feel it, is that the apple was pure. That is God's apple. That's the God heart, right? But the serpent infiltrated and poisoned that apple and said, drink the poison. But of course, the serpent didn't even say that, drink the poison. The serpent tempted them. Temptation is the big, but seduced, lured. That's how it works. And before you know it, the way the serpent works is your lens is the version that the serpent wants you to see. And that's the conditioning of the 3D world. And so, from my broader lens, I think we have to be able to see the filters. When you go to the eye doctor, I was just the eye doctor recently. And when they put the different lenses and they put things, they do all kinds of things. So you could see what it would look like with that correction or that shade, and you get to see what that lens would look like to look through all the time. And I think our lives here have been like that. The serpent's been trying on all these lenses and then going back into the serpent's workshop to keep planting seeds of the vision that the serpent wants to manifest here. And if we don't wake up to some of that, infiltration is incredibly powerful, and deception is too. So there are many of us that are awake to that. And then we're also trying to reconcile having this higher vision, but also witnessing the lower vision, knowing that a lot of people are asleep with the poisoned apple energy all around us. when you try and talk to people who only understand the poisoned apples version of this planet, they look at you like you're crazy, that you've lost it, right? Because that's not their lens on this life, on the way things work here. And what I've come to understand is that it's been said in some circles that the people have to be shown to wake up, to see. They're going to have to see how the serpent really works. And that's what I think is becoming more visible. As also, which you could probably speak to the astrology is supporting greater illumination, right? We are
Right.
seeing things more transparently. And where all that's going on in our world that seems really crazy right now, it's just because it's at the surface level. It's been going on for centuries, but we couldn't see it, right? And I just want to bring up one more point, because there's something in the Harry Potter films, you know, all these stories, the mythologies of these stories are messages for all of us, right? And there's, I can't remember, did you see the Harry Potter film series?
I've seen all of them, but honestly, I probably can't tell you any of the details. I just was there with my children watching them.
Oh yeah, well still, but it'll come back, because I don't remember all the details, but I remember the energies. And I think it's the basilisk one. It's the, which is a snake. Interestingly, how this is portrayed, but and how that basilisk worked and killed its victims or froze its victims. Do you remember the kids becoming stone or something? Oh,
No.
that's okay. Even if you don't, though, something in that story, when the snake would strike its victim, they would become like stone cold. Okay. And they would just be like a stone statue. That's my memory anyway. I'm sure there's Harry Potter fans out there that will correct the two of us in the comment section. But that's my memory. And what I think happened is that you didn't see it coming. So even like this, seeing the snake in a mirror, right? If you saw it, you froze. And I think that's kind of, I don't know, the feeling that I have is that the snake kind of sneaks up from behind, right? It sneaks up behind us. And in the past, we couldn't see what froze us. We never saw it coming. It kind of struck from behind us somehow, so we never saw. And they eventually decode that in the Harry Potter film. But now I think part of the God plan, the bigger plan, is that God's waking up his children. The Garden of Eden is activating again. Some of us are being called, I've been called to start reading more sacred texts. I haven't felt a call like that, not like this, my whole life. And just in the last few weeks, couple of months maybe, I've been feeling this nudging that's just getting stronger and stronger to either read more of the Bible, but maybe not even just the Bible, sacred texts where there's higher dimensional energy in the writings. And that might even be beyond channelings. There's a lot of channelings. I'm a channel, but I'm being called to go to something earlier, something, I don't know, maybe more like the Bible. I've also been called to the Keys of Enoch book. I've heard people mention it. I've just recently purchased it. It's very vibrationally rich in its content. I'm looking for a vibrational richness versus the flatness that sometimes, you know, and there's a lot of people talking about a lot of things, but I'm looking for where God's like living breath, the God breath is alive in the writings, right? Where the energy is living again. And I'm saying a lot of things here, and I want to give you a chance to respond, but there's a lot to what's happening is where we're feeling the bifurcation of worlds. We're feeling the new earth. We're also feeling very profoundly the old earth, the old paradigm, the serpent's reign and God's reign. And there is this bifurcation right now. And I think where I feel like some people who kind of know more of what's been happening through these cycles of time and centuries of time in this 3D matrix anyway, some of us have woken up and we're more, I don't know, I'd say immune, but we have a stronger spiritual constitution, and the poison of the propaganda and the apple, the poisoned apple, isn't as effective on us. So maybe as kids, we bought into this world a little bit, but there's a point of awakening that comes back because we still are a God being. And we know this, and we know that something about this realm isn't quite right. And then there are people who, well-meaning people, many well-meaning people, but the serpents, the atmosphere of the propaganda is so thick and so strong, like a smog, that that's the air that they're breathing in all day, and it's creating their vision, and that's the outpicturing that they're seeing. And they are very confident and committed that vision for this world, the 3D vision, is all there is. So, and we're, those of us who are sensitive are tuned into energy. If nothing else, we're feeling the collective go through this process where we're holding both, seeing both, witnessing both, experiencing both. And it's a lot. It's a lot to hold. And I think for me, I haven't said it here, but I'm saying in some of the videos coming out, there is this bifurcation of worlds. And the guides kind of came through me this larger metaphor of like a beltway around a city, right? And at the top is unity consciousness. And here we are, you said January 20th is a big date in the United States, but also in the world, because what's happening here is happening everywhere. Like what happens here is a template for the rest.
Yes.
And I feel like there was this bifurcation a little before that. I would say the 6th was a powerful day. Whether it hits the mark the way we wanted to see it, I don't necessarily know that the outpicturing is a match yet, but the vibrational templating is happening. And the 6th and the 20th were very big dates. I'd love to hear the astrology of those dates, but I can say I felt the shift in consciousness, me personally, intuitively. These were big dates. And I feel like people chose how you want to go around the city of DC, right? Which is a template for all the places on the globe, right? How do we want to go around that structure that's part of the conditioning of our world? And some people chose to go around the west side of the city in the metaphor that I see. And they're looking at people who would identify as being alternative media or, you know, crazy people or truth seekers or not following the narrative like everybody else. And whatever judgments that people have about that, when they bifurcated to the west, they were kind of looking at all the people who went the other direction, kind of like, yeah, you need a course correction, right? And the people who know, though, look at the people on the west side and know that we're all getting to the unity consciousness. God's calling all the children home. So's Gaia. But I think we're going to have the paths to get there. And I think if you haven't woken up to the duality game, that's just the language that I've come to use. If we haven't woken up to the serpent's game yet, then I think you're on the west side of the city and you're having to go around some rotaries and some tunnels and a whole bunch of things. And I think we're in that time. And I feel like the people who are awake to there's something more than what this world's outpicturing is showing us. There's a God vision for all of us. We're templated with that God vision. We're in like a God breath right now. So while it seems like nothing's happening or it's quieter on this side, it's gotten quiet in some ways. Some parts of the other side are getting louder. This is all en route to the reunification that's happening, but we all have to go through our own ascension or cleansing process. So to me, it starts with the metaphor, or whether it's literal, of that apple. And it starts with the apple is of God. That is God's heart. And we were given that heart, all of us, which means we all have the vision to see clearly. But the serpent's been very effective. And when you can't see it, you know, I say this in a video that's going to come out this weekend for my transmissions. Have you ever, I've seen a snake in the grass of my house, you know, on my lawn. And sometimes, you know, the grass can be spongy. It's amazing where I've actually watched the snake. When I saw it on the driveway, but when it crossed over the driveway and into the grass, it just disappears into the grass. It's not struggling, it's just barely but steadily moving. And I've been in awe when I've seen that, of the power of, like, unless I had seen it cross the driveway, I would have never seen it in the grass, right? And I think in that metaphor, some people can't see it in the grass. So they're on the west side of the city. They don't see it yet, but that snake is still there. That duality consciousness is still running, and we see it all around us in all the media and everything else. But there are those of us that saw the snake in the driveway. We saw it plain as day. We know what the snake is, and we know how the apple got poisoned. And, whether it's metaphor or whether there's a literal Adam and Eve, we'll know eventually. But however we take that as a consciousness, Adam and Eve had their own bifurcation. And then they had the Cain and Abel bifurcation, right? We've seen this bifurcation. And now I think the story of Adam and Eve is coming to a full circle closure back into unity consciousness, which brings us back into balancing a divine masculine and our divine feminine, and the Adam and the Eve inside us that is still carrying the shame and guilt and struggle and wrestling and the two wolves, or whatever we want to call that. We have to weave ourselves back into oneness. And there's a lot of paths to oneness. And we're going to have to watch how that plays out for ourselves and everyone else. But God is calling all of us home. Just like you said, you're seeing it, you're feeling it. But it's like there's a mystical way that this is playing out, where God is waking us all up. And there's a good serpent. There's a Kundalini energy inside us that's waking up. And so in the duality, there's like this, the devil snake, the satanic snake, and then there's the life force snake, there's the God snake. There's all this energy. And I think we're having to get a good look at duality right now. And we need to be grounded, and we have to access some of our spiritual tools, or just begin to breathe deeper and be willing to see deeper, because otherwise it's going to get more and more confusing for people. It's going to require awakening. It requires transformation and transmutation. There's no way out but in. You know what I mean? That's a lot of everything that I just said. Yeah.
A lot. No, there's this perception that people have that transformation is going to happen like a soft drink commercial, that it's going to happen like that. You're going to wake up and you're going to transform. And it's never going to happen that way, ever happen that way. And that's where you start bringing up some pretty dark things. You're bringing up the serpent. And I'm glad that you did. And I'm glad that you've talked about this on a number of your videos. You talk about it beautifully. And you talk about it truthfully. And you don't sugarcoat it. But the fact is that there is this darkness that we have to face. And the fear of facing the darkness is inhibiting people from facing it. It always has been this way. So if we're looking, and what we're really looking at right now is an opportunity for everyone on the planet to become an initiated soul, to become an individuated soul, to become a child of God, to become a person who is enlightened, who is leaving the three-dimensional or not three-dimensional, but third density matrix, and ascending into a higher state of consciousness. Now, it's never been easy, ever been easy, and there's a pathway that inevitably everyone has to take, and if you don't face up to what that pathway is, you won't ascend, and no one can do it for you. So when all of this started, and I would say going back to right after the elections and going into the year 2021, a lot of people were elated. I've never felt that way. I felt the opposite. I felt that I've evoked the 23rd Psalm many times in many different ways. It's what it feels like. I'm walking through the valley of the shadow of death. I know it's ahead. And as Woody Guthrie's saying, no one else can walk it for you. You must walk it for yourself. So are we prepared to do that? In the process of ascension, in the process of initiation, it's always been the same. is that there's something called the guardian of the threshold. It's in our mythologies. It's always been there. So there's the guardian of the threshold is a dragon.
Wow.
Guardian of a threshold is a serpent or some adversarial beast. Now, you can look at serpents in different ways. There are good serpents and there's not so good serpents. In Western mythology, in our psyche, in our soul's mythology, the dragons have always been adversarial beasts. They've always held the heroes back or held people back from crossing a threshold. Now, other chimeral beasts or entities, chimeras, the major one is the Sphinx. Does the same function. It's an unholy or unnatural energy or being that will not allow you to cross a certain threshold. And if you go to ancient Egypt or the ancient world, the roads are and the monuments are just loaded with these threshold guardians. And these threshold guardians are keeping you in a lower perspective of consciousness. And if you look at the mythology of the Sphinx, which was the riddle of the Sphinx, which was the mythology related to Oedipus Rex. So Oedipus enters into a city of Thebes, which is the ancient city in Greece, where the secrets of Egypt were brought into Europe, and it was established, and this was a holy city where all of this information existed. The city was being besieged by the Sphinx, and the Sphinx would come upon a person, and it would proceed to tear you apart and kill you. Now, the Sphinx had the head of a woman, it had the body of a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. And before it would kill you, it'd ask you a riddle. And if you got the riddle right, no one ever got the riddle right. But if you got the riddle right, no one knew what would happen. But before it would decide to kill you, you would ask you the riddle. And if you were so fearful or terrorized by the Sphinx, most people couldn't answer the question. It would tear you apart. And the riddle of the Sphinx was what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the middle of the day, and 3 legs at the end of the day. And the more legs that the person has, gave away this answer, the more legs the being has, the weaker it is. And that answer was man. The answer was human beings. The babies walk on 4 legs and then we stand upright. But then at the end of our life, we walk with a cane. So the answer was man. So what I always got out of that riddle was we are the answer to the riddle. Humanity, we are within us. We hold all the answers to the riddle, right? We hold it within ourselves. We have to look within ourselves in order to discover this. The function then is to not allow you to cross the threshold. But when the hero answered the question correctly, the Sphinx died at his feet. It was just this phantom that really didn't harm him at all, because he already was an initiated soul, and he was on his way to a higher path and of knowledge. And that's really what dragons do. That dragons hide, or dragons hoard gold, or they protect entrances to portals, or they hoard or enslave beautiful princesses, which they have absolutely no use for, right? What are they going to do with a princess? I don't know, but you can't have her, right? So what does a mountain of gold and what does a princess have in common? And the answer is it represents wealth, but a type of wealth that you cannot possibly get in the 3rd density. It represents wealth that goes beyond anything on the physical plane. So the princess is the goddess, and she represents wisdom, right? And the dragon is preventing you from accessing or creating a union with that being. And the mountain of gold represents an indelible knowledge that cannot be corrupted. But you cannot access this information unless you confront this being. And the being is a threshold guardian. And so that's, I think, where we're at. Where we're at is that most people spend their whole life not confronting it because it's too psychologically disturbing to do that, right? Why would I start seeking this journey into wisdom, and I start learning that all of the things that I was told through my education, through my religion, through my vocation, it's not really true, right? And so my whole world starts turning upside down. And this has always been the process of alchemy. Alchemy has always been about this, is that only the hero will take the journey. So there's always been two guardians of the threshold. There have been two thresholds. And the first threshold is simply fear. You have to confront that which you fear the most. And so that is what actually that is that's your karma. Your karma is fear. So if you've never faced the summation of all of your disappointments, the summation of all of your transgressions, the summation of all your shortcomings, which is compiled over sequential lifetimes, then you can't move forward. And I think that the astrology is telling me with a vengeance, there is nowhere to run anymore. You will eventually be forced to face it. Whether you willingly or unwillingly care to go through this process, the astrology, and I don't know how this is going to happen, but the astrology is suggesting that that's exactly what we must do and what we will be forced to do. Now, I don't know the details of how that was going to happen, but that's what I'm kind of struggling with a little bit, or I'm trying to come to understand or come to grips with, is that we do need to overcome this fear. We do need to face our karma, which is part of the process of ascending. We have to do all of these things. And then if you can do that, you've ascended to a certain degree, but you're not where you have to go yet. There's a second threshold that a second guardian that you have to face. And that's the part that no one ever got. I mean, I've talked to so many people that have ascended or in the process of ascending. And when you face your fear, and when you redeemed your karma, when the karma no longer, when you're no longer on that wheel anymore, and when karma no longer holds any power over you, then you're asked, what are you going to do with this energy? What are you going to do with this power? Because you have now ascended into a higher dimensional realm. So the question is what will you do with it? So many people have this power, have this energy, have this new direction, or this newfound energy. And they say, I'm going to empower myself. And I am going to be a player. I'm not going to get played anymore. I'm going to be a player now. And guess what? I just went from Abel to Cain, just like you had talked about in your last lecture. I am now going to be not a victim. I'm going to be a victimizer, because I know that I have this power, and I am going to be part of, I can be a practicing occultist if I want to, a ritualistic occultist if I want to do, or join some organization that amasses power and influence. Because through the process of living our lives for the last many, many years, since Adam and Eve, so let's say that was the last 10,000 years since we were forced to leave Atlantis, or the garden of the ascended consciousness, which we have been forced to leave. We've been playing this game forever, and that's why we have such a beautiful and important story that that you bring up again in the creational mythology. That there's Abel, who was favored by God, and then there was Cain, who is jealous. And so he was more conniving and more manipulative, and he kills Abel. And then he's asked, where's your brother? Right? And he says, am I my brother's keeper? Guess what that defines? It defines life in a linear and confrontational and competitive, egotistical
separation consciousness is now justified.
Yes.
Yes.
And that happened. That crime has been perpetuated throughout the ages. And we're at the point now where we have to ascend out of it. Now, everyone has to face their fear. And that's not enough. The next stage, and I don't know how would I explain this. There's a second threshold. So the first guardian of the threshold, or the first threshold, you reach a guardian. It could be a dragon. It is a draconian-like energy. And if you face your fear, you've passed it. The second question or the next question that will be given or you'll be asked is, what are you going to do with the energy? Most people say, I want it for my own, and I'm going to do what I think is best for it, and I'm going to empower myself. People have been doing this now for 10,000 years or longer. But who's asking you the question? The second guardian is asking you the question. And it's called the greater guardian. He's the greater guardian of the threshold versus the lesser guardian of the threshold.
Oh, wow.
The greater guardian of the threshold says, you have this energy of this power. What will you do with it? So you have a choice. You can take all of that energy, all of that power, and you can put it on an altar, and you can sacrifice it for the greater good of mankind. Or you can utilize it for your own gain. So as it turns out, there was a third son of Adam and Eve.
Wow.
Yeah. I always used to ask this in class. I used to do some adult education classes, and I would always say, how many sons or how many children did Adam and Eve have? And everyone said Cain and Abel. I'd say, there's a third son. What's his name? And everyone would go, I don't know, because it's in Genesis, and his name is Seth. And so Seth is the third son, and it's said that the lineage of Seth were the children who came to know God. So there's a lot of intrigue and mystery that surrounds the race of Seth. But the Gnostics knew who he was, and the Gnostics considered themselves as children of Seth. They called themselves the race of Seth. They classified people in three different ways. They said they said there were three different races on the world. And of course, everyone gets bent out of shape when you use the word race, because they think that you're talking about the color of your skin or your culture. It has nothing to do with that. And Gnostics knew that. It had to do with where your level of consciousness resided. And so they said that there was the race of Abel, the perpetual victims, the meek, they called it the people of the earth, is another name for them. And then they said that they were the race of Cain. And the race of Cain were what they called the psychics, the people of the soul. And they were people who were people of the intellect, of the ego, is what they were really talking about. And then they said there was a very small amount of people in this world who were part of the race of Seth. And they called them the pneumatics, and that meant the people of the spirit. And they were the ones who came to know God, right? And so the Gnostics felt that they, in their religion, if you want to call it a religion, their religion was not based on belief. Their religion was based on knowledge, experienced directly through events that was gained directly through experience. Now, so they were not people of belief. They called themselves Gnostics, which means knowers.
Knowers.
And they were people who had knowledge of the inner self or knowledge of the heart. Unfortunately, every single time this took a foothold in human existence, there was a genocide against it. And we're right again on another rebirth of all of this. And we really have to ask ourselves, is there a genocide that's being waged against it? The answer is absolutely. It may manifest, maybe it won't manifest, I don't know. But the people, what we come to realize is that why are we doing this? You know, I mean, the way that it's explained is that the greater guardian of the threshold does not allow anyone to pass that threshold. The lesser guardian of the threshold allows you to pass the threshold. You've passed the portal or the doorway or the barrier or the gate that held you back because of your fear. Now you're fearless to a certain degree. You don't have any fear. Now you're asked, what are you going to do with this power? What are you going to do with this energy? How many people would take all of that in that they gained, put it on an altar and sacrifice it? What are you sacrificing it? And again, you're sacrificing it for the greater good of humanity. So it turns out that those who take the lower path, who start to empower themselves, who start doing all kinds of really cool things and mysterious things and practicing magic and, you know, all these other things, they're not empowering themselves. What they're doing is they're bringing everyone else down while they have this illusion of empowering themselves. The ascension of the earth is exactly that. It's the ascension of the earth. So if we were to look at this in another way, when Jesus told us how to pray, he said that he gives us the Lord's Prayer, and in that prayer, he's invoking this idea of heaven and earth merging together. The heaven is, the earth is ascending into the heavenly realms, right? And he meant this in Mass. He meant this in Mass, that all of it would ascend.
All of it.
Into the heavenly realms, right? All of it. But if you are using magical principles for personal impulses or egotistical reasons, you're holding
a
everyone back.
workaround to get through that second portal. That's the workaround.
Well, the second portal, as the second portal is that we're told that if the guardian of the second portal will not allow you to pass through it. And what comes to mind is, my burden is light and my yoke is sweet. He's going to ask you to wear this yoke. And you're not going to do this. He's not going to even ask you to do it. You are going to be compelled to do it, because you'll realize that there's been this being all along who's carried us to this point, and that you're being asked to join this being in this struggle, now that we see what's happening, to help to free humanity. And there's only one path, and that path is in the presence of this greater guardian. And no one is going to ascend past it until everyone ascends past it. That's what we learn through this experience. So the serpent, is in us. I know you've mentioned this, but the serpent exists within us. And we can look outside of ourselves and say, well, there's the serpent and there's the devil, but we also have to develop the courage to look within ourselves. And what we have to do is we have to redeem the serpent. And that part of this process, which is ego, the serpent is ego,
Right.
is redeeming the ego. And that is, I think, what this whole process is about. Now it's coming with a vengeance, and it's coming in like biblical proportions, and it's coming through hardship. But that's really where we're going. And I can see a lot of people feeling that we're on the verge of a new birth or a new awakening, where we're going to be asking, we'll be begging for the privilege of putting the yoke around our neck and participating in this task, which is really becoming the only task worth doing, which is the redemption of all of us. And
Yes.
we can only redeem ourselves through the redemption of ourself. We redeem the world and everyone else around us.
That might just have been one of the best, not just explanations, but consciousnessations, if that can be a word, right? It's beyond an explanation. It's not from the mind, it's from the heart and the soul of the integration work that you've done to uncover these greater stories that are a part of our story individually and collectively. And it is that sense of all for one and one for all. And, only until the last one of us awakens will we make it through that portal. And yet you can't force the last one of you to awaken. So there begins the question of, how do you wear the yoke? How do you live your essence in a way that by the very being of it activates, or at least invites, other people to get curious about their own? And I
Yes.
think this is also part of the greater alchemy we're seeing in some of us, right? Because it's easy to get caught up. You can see people, we don't have to name any names, but and this could have been me another lifetime. So what I'm talking about,
It was all of us.
it's
in
all of
another
us.
lifetime.
We've gotten to that second portal, and we have chosen somehow choice points that empower us or position us, right? Or raise us up in some way. And now we know even the tricks of that, because that's
Yes.
all part of the illusion that many of us are seeing past. And so, but another trap can be for these highly sensitive awakened souls is to think that we need to save everybody in the conditioned way of saving, rescuing, and that only serves the victim. So when you're talking about this riddle of what we do, the biggest thing that I've ever understood is sort of the name of this channel on YouTube is Color the Magic, shine your light, be your divine essence, be the one who unifies inside the two serpents, right? The Kundalini life force, divine, life-giving, immortal energy that we have inside us, and also the shadow of the serpent of all the lives lived and all the poisoned apples ingested through time. We have this inside us, but when we become willing to do that unification process inside ourselves, we are empowering not only ourselves, but the frequency of the planet. And that becomes the God apple again that people are seeking. I think people are seeking the ultimate apple from the Garden of Eden, but in that reunification process. But like you said, many are still at the first gate. They're still at the first door saying, yeah, I'm not going there. And I would say for me, there's this deeper, we know this metaphor, but there's fear. We have to face the karma. And a lot of people, as much as they can, they're still holding up their covers. They still don't want to see. They don't want to look. They don't want to hear. But as more and more of us hear the summoning, because that's all that there is now, is the summoning home to unification, is the summoning home to the ascension process. All of us will be going through that first gate in some way, shape, or form. We're going through it now. And I believe the greater guardian, in the way my own energy field feels language and feels energy, it is the two words that come up again and again as you were talking is unification, reunion, unifying, right? We're
Yes.
sewing ourselves back together. We're weaving ourselves back together into wholeness, which means there's still more work to be done in that process. That's like roll up your sleeves. It's not an easy task.
Right.
But what makes it easy is the second vibration that I feel is faith, but not faith with a little f when it's convenient, not faith when, something's happened in your life and you're in a crisis. Say, oh, help. A friend of mine that's in some of the podcasts, Renee Tainter, says, help me, Rhonda, right? It's like this, help me, Rhonda, help me, God, help me in this moment, because there's a crisis. But faith with a capital F, which is the more mature faith, which is when it's easy and when it's hard, when it's all the time, when it's God's vision for me, which is always bigger than my vision for me, right? God's vision for the unification, which is always bigger than my best vision of the reunification. God's vision for my gifts, which is always bigger than my vision for my gifts. And listening. So you have to have the unification, the reunion consciousness. We are invited to feel faith at a whole other level, which is what we're all doing. We can't see the how of how we're moving from where we've been and where we are right now to where we're in this glorious Garden of Eden again. We need that faith with a capital F. And there is this willingness to surrender all of our lower ego abilities to think and reason and do all those things from an ego lens of perception, and trusting God's higher vision to move through us and be us. And somehow, I don't have all the answers either, but I know each one of us has to shine our own unique light. The whole candle, every one of us is a candle that must ignite to light up the sun. And it's just like a puzzle. Somebody's used this example before, but you have one piece missing from a puzzle and it's just not complete. It's not whole, and it's somehow, in the puzzle sense, less satisfying. It's less it's just not what we know is coming. There's a full integration, no piece left out. So there's compassion for ourselves in the journey at that greater guardian's portal of the next level, is that we are living this higher consciousness. It's that God's will, not my will. There's a point in the hero's journey where you wake up to realizing that you're a creator and you can manifest anything. So we go about manifesting and creating, and that's a lot of fun. But then there's time to go to the next level where you're manifesting for the greater good. You're manifesting for the highest good of all. And I don't exactly know how all of us are going to wake up together, but I do believe an element of that that's critical is each of us embracing and loving and unifying with our original divine spark, our original divine template, and having that be our priority, having that be our, that is the purpose, is to be that frequency of that light that you came to be. That frequency is our purpose right now. And when we turn away from the darkness, that is, in the language you've given me today, which is wonderful, is we're turning away from that greater guardian's invitation, and the task before us is to unify with the guardian, unify with God itself, unify with Gaia, and unifying at this holistic level, and all in the cosmos, the beings in the cosmos, physical and non-physical realms. This is the greatest show in the universe because they're watching people make the choice of union and reunion and oneness again, to stand as siblings and cousins and family to the greater cosmos. And we are in this purification process, but trying to turn away from it is giving into the fear, which prevents people going through the first door. So by those of us that can be speakers and messengers and voices of having already been through some of that alchemy, we've already been through some of those challenges. And now when other challenges like that come up, I call in my tool bag. I call in my toolkit. I have the repertoire of skills that I use then. So things about fear don't rattle my vibrational field very much anymore. It's this deeper lesson now that I think where a lot of us are, is how do we participate in the unification with ourselves and with everyone else when it can still look scary and dark out there, when it can look like the serpent outside of us is winning. We have to know the God within that is always and eternally victorious. So the light has already won. It's unifying with that and then listening for how your frequency wants to not only embody that, but to emit that vibration as all spins and all these timelines converge. And it seems pretty wild on our world right now. It's like the inner visioning for a different outpicturing of a new world. And it's going to take all of us visioning that together to manifest it into form out of the darkness that we've been living in. And so I just have known that you can't turn away from the darkness. And the reason I transcended some of my previous avatar challenges, if you want to call it that, or the hero's journey challenges, I've done my fair share of trying to go around it, go under it, rise above it. And the only reason it alchemized the way that it did is because I walked right through the fire of it. And that is what alchemy is. And when you do that enough times, we're built for this. We're designed to go through these things.
Right.
And every one of us has to contribute what that unique essence is that we are now, to empower the people facing those heroes' tasks for the first time and the lesser guardian, and also to keep going to strengthen the union with the greater guardian and the union with this portal and the union with God, with the faith and the unification and the surrendering, God's will, God's vision for me more than my vision for me.
Yeah. So there's this idea that, and Dolores Cannon talked about this. You've talked about it. Rudolf Steiner talked about it a lot. I remember reading at the beginning. I read Rudolf Steiner. I went, where is he coming from with some of this stuff? And what he said was he almost the most essential aspect of his teaching was something which he called the mystery of Golgotha. And he said that the universe changed at that moment. He said, in many times, he said, I cannot emphasize this enough. This was the greatest event that happened within the universe. And at the time, the universe was a galaxy. So we didn't know that there was more than one galaxy. So we can at least say it's the greatest event within the galaxy. And I'm like, yeah, okay, that's a pretty grand statement. Maybe this happens on other worlds, maybe it doesn't. Well, then I started reading and listening to other people, and you start realizing that this world is unique because it's an exercise in free will, and that there are multiple worlds involved in this. And once they start getting involved in this, they're karmically entangled to the outcome. In fact, so much is now focused on what's happening on this world that it is the greatest event from everything that I can see that is happening right now in the galaxy, because what happens here affects everything else. So what they did here, I think it was after the disastrous, events of the Atlantean experience, which didn't go very well.
No.
Is they said, fine. They said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to create, at least within your mind, we're going to create a void and in that void, God doesn't exist. There's no God. Now, there's a mythology which tells us this. And this mythology is the Egyptian mythology, which talks about the death of the father element of God, or the divine masculine, and the death of Osiris. And so, not to get stuck in all the details, but he was killed, and then his wife cobbled them back together with the help of, I think it was Thoth, and she copulated with him, and then she had a son. And the son's name was Horus. And then Horus, I think it's his cousin, there was a guy named Set. And Set was a usurper. And so you have this whole Abel and Cain duality playing out the whole time. right? And they're injuring themselves and they're maiming themselves and they're doing all this terrible stuff. And it's this constant struggle, you know? But the fact is that when the existentialist says there is no God, when Nietzsche says there's no God, I completely agree with him. Within the physical plane, within the 3D realm, we've created a reality where God doesn't exist. Now, what does exist is a world that's ruled by ego. And that ego is ruled by a being that it created. The Gnostics called it LWLW, but it was a demiurge that is created by the egotistical mind, because the ego has to look outside of itself to understand what anything is. So it creates what it thinks is God, which is basically which manifests as Lucifer or Belial or Satan or Ahriman or whatever it is that you want. So it's created a world where gods exist, and it worships those gods and can become empowered by those gods. And so we've created a reality, a void in this reality that we live in, where God does not exist. But that's exactly not true. So the divine masculine God is dead. It's been withdrawn. The feminine element of God has always been here, and that's again that's Gaia. That's our Earth Mother. That's Mother Nature. She's always been here, but because of the fact that divine authority was withdrawn, she's been usurped herself, and she's been debased, and she's been violated over and over and over and over and over and over again. And that's actually what the whole Osiris and Isis and all that talks about that too. So now we have this world where there is no divine authority anymore, and we've created these artificial gods and constructs, and chaos is reigning, and hierarchy is ruling, you know, and draconian energy is controlling all of these things. And now we're at the point where we're trying to get out of it. Now, the interesting part is that the initiates of the mystery call themselves the children, we'll say the children of the widow.
Oh. And
the widow is Mother Nature. She's the divine goddess. She's never left us. So what we're starting to realize now, and I think that the vision is coming to fruition, is that we have to bring the Heavenly Father back into the realm through ourself. The divine masculine comes back through us into this realm. And we have to channel that energy. And I talked about this before in the last lecture about channeling the heroic impulses within us.
Yes.
It's interesting that the greater guardian of the threshold is as I have experienced it, is what I call the true king. He's just an archetype. We can look at it as an archetype. But in my experience, it was a true king, which doesn't exist in the physical realm right now. It doesn't exist in lower density construct. So what is a true king? Well, I can show you false kings. They're all over the place. A false king is a king who believes that his sovereigns serve him.
Yes.
A true king there was only one that I know of, and he serves all of his subjects. That's the true king. And so when you face this and understand this reality, you understand the power and the love and the compassion behind this king. And this is the realm of the king that we need to restore. And we're restoring it then through our own individual channeling. Now you say we come to this in many different ways, and that's true because we're different facets of our divine parents, of this king. And so we bring it into this realm. And so there's a really interesting passage. It's in Matthew, I believe, and it's the parable. It's the parable of the wedding feast. And in the story, there was this king, and his son was getting married, and so he called on all of his most devout and coveted and loyal subjects to come to his son's wedding. And he sent out his messengers, and they heard the message, and they said, "We're too busy. We're not coming. It's just another wedding. Forget it. I'm not coming." So they came back and they said, "I'm so sorry, sire, but no one's coming." And he went, "What? I asked them to come." So he says, "No, go back out there again and tell them that I am asking them, you need to come to my son's wedding." So they went back out there again, and the messengers this time were abused, and some of them were killed. So they came back, and he told them the story. He says, "Wow." He says, "Okay." He says, "Go out and tell everybody. Everybody is invited to this wedding. They're all invited to this wedding." And so the people who were not, let's say, initiated, see, those who crossed the first threshold, they didn't have time. They were too busy doing their own thing. Right. Those who haven't crossed the threshold yet said, "Sure, why not? Let's go." So, of course, the unification is with Christ, is with his son. And so even as the wedding procession or the wedding feast begins, he's shocked to find that most of the people in the wedding party or in the wedding participating in the wedding are not properly dressed. They're not prepared. And so this concept that many are called but few are chosen. So this idea is, and during those times when they would have these great wedding feasts, everyone was given a robe to wear. They were given everything they needed to participate, but even then, they didn't wear the robes. So what? There's nothing less effective than a king who has no power. If you're living within a reality where the king's sovereignty is not recognized, he's powerless. And so this will continue to happen and will continue to occur. But I think we're in the point now where we're starting to wake up. We're starting to say, wait a minute, this hasn't worked. And now we need to come back. And now we need to understand the true initiates, those that call themselves the children of the widow, are here. And there's millions of us here because we understand that this is what's happening right now. And that we are here for the wedding feast, and that we are here to bring the kingdom of the Father back into the realm of the earth, into the kingdom of the Mother. This is what we're here to do. Again, I know this is what we're supposed to do. I just don't know how we're going to do it. And the only answer I keep getting over and over and over again is stay put, is live to your fullest potentials, to talk about these things in the open. And to be an example for others. It's all we can do, because that's the only way that the Logos is given us. This is the only way that we can do it. It's just this.
Yeah. And as hard as the how of how we're going to make it all through this is so complex, being yourself, being your gifts, being this, at least the best of you that you can muster, is actually very accessible. God made it simple.
Yes, very simple. But he also made it very painful for us because we've been through this many times before and we don't want to go through it again. We were just like, can't we just skip this part? Because this is just agony to have to go through this again and again and again and again and again, with the promise that this will be the last time we have to go through it. I hope it is.
Right.
I really hope it is. I have been told by virtually every spiritual portal that I can look through, that it is the last time.
It is.
This is a real amazing time that we're going through right now. But on the other hand, it's a very dark time, and it's a very oppressive or heavy time for us to go through the dark night of the soul again. You know, it's hard.
It is hard when it's heavier, and yet I know that often only unless we're in that place of despair and we're on our knees do we often open the greatest. In fact, that's a quote. I don't think I have it here, but it's in the time of our greatest challenge that often we're the most open. I've seen it time and time and time again, and we saw that even in the wake of 9/11. It's just people open their hearts, their doors, their bank accounts, whatever it was in those great challenges, whatever the cause of that might be. Our greatest humanity emerges, and we seem to not do it when things are manageable, when things are where we can deal with it, when we can get by. We don't dig deep to open to others and to this process in any other. I just haven't seen it in any other time en masse. And we won't get into COVID right now because that's another version of the experience of the systematic implementation of separation, right? That's what we're going through. And yet we're also in this timeline of the greatest opportunity to come into divine union, all of us again. And it's not without work, but I think people are having to feel the squeeze in the ways that each of us as a unique facet of God will. And I think those of us that are called and have an awareness of what's going on, are doing our best to step up and say, how can I best serve? And the way I understand that is, how can I best be my frequency? How can I best be the vibration of God that I am? A lot of people feel like, am I supposed to teach? Am I supposed to move to another country? Am I supposed to, there's all this, am I supposed to? I would really just say and this is the work that could be hard, but it is easy once you get better and better at it, is being yourself. Honoring what's true for you, saying things that are uncomfortable. If we're talking about the serpent, and it makes, and for some people that's very uncomfortable language. There's other people that are speaking about things that I listen to sometimes on podcasts, and I get uncomfortable. We all have our unique discomforts and triggers of like, okay, I'm open to this, but let's not talk about this. And I witnessed that come up in myself of like, it's just hard. And then I work with myself and I listen for what is mine to do about that energy. And we're listening for our frequency. We're listening for what our light is called to do at this time. And when we're unifying with that, with our frequency, with our light, we are alchemizing the change that's necessary, because it might not even be the thing we become because of that. It's in our willingness to unite that we draw the greatest strength and we transmute the greatest energy. That's in the point of surrender. And the surrender is so many things, but it's also the laying down of the ego, that the ego would know anything about what this process is really about.
Right.
And it's powerful. It is a powerful experience. And I think we're going through deeper and deeper layers of it. The best thing we can have is the don't know mind and a heart full of faith. If we could do more of that, all the instructions through energy will come to us. And for some people, that's just a foreign language right now, right? That's just foreign to some people, that the guidance will be there if we let go, because fear is at the door.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's really interesting that you mentioned that. So there's a large part of this is redemption, and we're redempting an element within us that is Luciferic. So this is kind of where the duality of good and evil manifests, but sometimes we can look at this duality that plays out as good and evil as just two polarities of evil. And then where what we need to do, instead of siding with one side or the other is to come right in the middle and
Yes.
balance those energies out.
Yes.
So there's no coincidence that Jesus was crucified between two other crosses. And that's the symbology of that.
He's the center
event.
point. He's this neutrality.
There were three crosses and he was in the center. And there was two crosses on each, one cross on each side. And in the mythology that we have of the event, there was one redemptive person and one unredemptive person.
Wow.
And in that, we talk about the good thief, is that at that moment, or during that time, that the person who had committed transgressions, who said that, you know, the one person was deriding Jesus, you know, and saying, if you're the savior, get us off this cross, you know, who the heck are you, and then the other person was saying he did no wrong. He doesn't deserve to have this as we deserve it, and he's the one who asks the savior to remember him in heaven, right? So that's very powerful. And so there was an element within ego that recognized something greater than what it was. And so that element of ego, they talk about it in certain esoteric communities or circles, is that's Luciferic to a certain degree. And so they actually talk to this day, right now, about they call it the redemption of Lucifer, is that and all it entails is that it's at the moment when we realize that part of our ego, which thought it was superior and thought it knew everything, realizes it knows nothing, and that there's a power that's greater than itself.
Yes.
And it's that moment of surrender that you just mentioned is when that's redeemed, and that all we must do now is to understand that we no longer the ego is the function of ego has never been. That's one of the things I wanted to talk about. The function of ego has never been a creational function. The function of ego is to take information into itself and analyze information, to contemplate information. But the source of information, it can't create it. You've talked about this in your video very beautifully. You actually said this, and I was really impressed, is that you talk about the facsimile apple, and although that was God's apple, but it also the serpent. The way it's explained is that, and this is a famous story. It's called Faust. And the story of Faust is that there is this doctor who wants to learn all the secrets of the universe. So he goes to this being who knows everything, of calculable knowledge. The being's name is Mephistopheles. And that's one of the archetypal demonic or evil beings, Mephistopheles, devil. Right? And so he asks Mephistopheles all these questions, and Mephistopheles just knows it, spits it all out, right? It's encyclopedic genius, encyclopedic knowledge. It knows everything. Now, for some reason, somewhere along the line, we got tangled up, and we were twisted around through propaganda, through coercion, through abuse, through all kinds of things, to emulate the intelligence of Mephistopheles. Not only are we supposed to emulate the intelligence of Mephistopheles, we're supposed to be able to possess it, which we are literally incapable of doing. We can't do it, right? So if I give you, this is what we struggle with in medical school all the time, trying to remember facts when you should never ever be held to remembering facts. You should just be able to talk about things conceptually, how things work, what's the concept behind things, not the minutial details. That makes no sense to remember those things. They shift every few years. It's stupid. We should never be working on it. But the point is that what we emulate and what people are walking around today trying to emulate is Mephistopheles, right? So we can hold the power of Mephistopheles in our hands with little artificial devices. We're plugged into a grid that Mephistopheles has created. The esoteric people saw this 100 years ago, and they said, this will be satanic. This will be what they called Ahrimanic. This will be the rise of this energy, this entity. And why are we being held to this standard? It's inhuman. It's an inhuman standard. So we're emulating, not only are we emulating, but we're coveting this energy. We're coveting this energy. And we are trying to hold each other to these standards. You need to know all this information. Well, I don't have it. I can't possibly know it. Well, you need to know it. So, okay, now you need this device. And this device is going to rule your life based on you giving away all of your sovereignty and all of your creational energy to it.
Exactly.
Right? So this is a diabolical plan, and this is a diabolic energy. And this is how we can say Mephistopheles or Satan or Ahriman. This is how this energy is manifesting itself into this world. Now, we should, and what Rudolf Steiner told us is that we don't think like Mephistopheles. We weren't designed to think like Mephistopheles. We were designed to think like an angel, like the archangel, like Michael, the archangel, Uriel, Raphael. We were designed to think like an angel. How do angels think? They don't care about the details. They command all the energies that need to know the details. Those are elemental energies. They hold command over that. They hold dominion over that. They think creatively. They are the ones who create the thoughts that the ego then
implements.
Right?
Yes.
So it's a spiritual process. And so we should never covet being like Mephistopheles. We were designed to think like the angels. And that's who we are. And that's who we're supposed to be. Now, of course, the angels have far more power than we realize, right? And we're just tapping into that. That's coming if we allow it to manifest itself in that right way. But when we start putting up virtual platforms that try to usurp or mimic that energy, remember, Mephistopheles thinks of two planes. It's like a binary system. It thinks in sensation, and it thinks in egotistical, numbers, math, these types of things. It thinks that way. There's no joy in the way Mephistopheles thinks. There's no creative impulse.
There's no creative impulse, and that's where the joy is.
Whatsoever. Human beings think on 4 parameters. We have physical, we have ego, yes, but we also have emotional, we also have intuitions. We're drawing off of all of these things. Then Mephistopheles can't do that. Computers can't do that. Binary systems can't do that. Yet we're enslaving ourselves to those systems. Now, the most interesting part is the serpent thinks that way also. The serpent is the draconian energies. They have no creational impulses.
No.
So they're usurping our creational impulses to survive off of.
Exactly.
And they're feeding, they feed off of our fear. They're feeding off of our fear. They're feeding off of our apprehensions, but they're also harnessing this human world for their survival. They've always done this. And it's as soon as we start realizing that this is nothing that we should be coveting, this is nothing that we should be emulating towards, but we should be moving away from that towards our spiritual origins, then we cut the serpent's head off, or we stop feeding the serpent, and the serpent eventually becomes smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and smaller until it becomes ineffective and really not much of anything, right?
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
And you're just, you're so fantastic about just the ways that you've been synthesizing and experiencing and that you can share these stories and these parables, because all these things are reflections of what we are, and they were breadcrumbs in the hero's journey that we're meant to recollect when we're in this process. But it's like the north wind and the sun, you know that story.
Of course, yes.
Yeah, and there's this battle between the wind and the sun. For our listeners, you could probably tell it better, and then I just wanted to expand, really. But you know, there's a traveler that they're having these competitions between them, and who's more powerful. Look at the ego, who's more powerful in the story, right? Power, power, power. And finally the north wind says to the sun, okay, we're going to settle this once and for all. And they see a traveler wearing a coat, and they strike a deal that whoever can make the traveler take his coat off is the one that is victorious and most powerful. And so the wind blows and blows and blows, and I'm fast forwarding it, but it's not a long parable. It's very short.
It's a short one. It's an Aesop's fable, right?
It's an Aesop's fable, and and in fact, the traveler takes the coat and holds it tighter. The wind effort.
The harder the wind blows, the tighter the man holds onto his cloak, or
right. And then, but the sun, and this is the metaphor that I want us all to remember in these times. The sun is just more of what it is. It just shines bright, and the man starts perspiring and easily and willingly takes off his coat. And that's the shedding of the costumes to me. That's the shedding of this 3D theater. If we would just be the sons that we are, if we would tap into that feeling inside us and cultivate that in whatever ways we need to, even if it's getting a coach or having somebody who speaks this language. You know, sometimes people just need to experience these kinds of conversations, listen to podcasts like this to empower you to take off your coat like the traveler and be the sun. Because the wind, if we were to assign archetypes, is that maybe the serpent, or the serpent Luciferian energy inside us that's saying, oh, I know how to solve this.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. And so there's so much in everything that we've touched on today, but I just want to, first, I want to thank you for joining me. And I need to have you back. I mean, these are a series of conversations and heart sharings, because that's what you do when you're in the journey. And we are being those suns shining our light in these conversations together. And that's what you do. We're empowering all of us in these conversations. And that's our heart's intent. I know, I feel it from yours, and I feel it in mine. And I hope our listeners, you know, listen to this. There's so many rich parcels of energy that you bring, Paul. You know, the way you're serving the light, being the light, emulating and being this light that you are. It's so rich. And you can see, when you see the things in our devices and all the things that Paul has said, if you pay attention, where's the life force? Where's true life force? It's in nature. My laptop is actually almost out of battery while I'm on this conversation. And that's a metaphor. Like, nature keeps going. Storm after storm, experience after experience, it regenerates. It creates new life. It's creative. These are, you know, get depleted. They aren't self-renewable.
They only replicate. They don't do anything else but replicate or mimic. That's all
Right.
they do.
Exactly. And that's even just any of these things that we've talked about, for people to take some of these parcels of energy inside yourself and contemplate, but feel them inside, because it's moving that 18-inch journey from our minds to our heart centers, where all the wisdom is. You know, that's where the divine, that's where we get beyond whatever Steiner or whoever called that void, where it was without God. The heart is still connected to the divine feminine, and the heart connects us with all time and all God consciousness. So when we're trying to figure things out up here, we will hit dead ends, right? And we will run out of battery, but not here in the heart. It's a renewable frequency, because it comes from the divine feminine. And I think we are coming into that place of the union of the divine masculine, the divine feminine. And we have to open that inner door. We need these keys to unlock, you know, that higher consciousness. And we will have these tasks. We will have these hero's journey tasks before us, these tests, these choice points. And we're at the precipice of some of these choice points. And I'm so grateful to have you communicating with me and talking with me and musing, through the higher frequencies about what this is all about. Because anyone can talk about the details in the news, but this is a much higher conversation than what that is. It's the concept, not the detail, right? Because it's the vibrational templating that brings the bigger solutions and the answers. Yeah.
We're being asked to find the still point, and in this process we're learning how to reverse the flow. And what I mean by that is that one of my visions I had, and it was one of my first visions. It was a very profound vision. It was a dream, and in the dream I was asking for. I literally petitioned the spiritual realm before I went to sleep. I said, just once, give me an answer here. Throw me a bone. I'm confused. I don't know what's going on. I was at a point in my life where I was at crossroads, and so I got the vision, all right, but it had nothing to do with what I was struggling with. I just looked at this thing and I went, that's the answer. This, and it was a really profound alchemical vision. And the vision had I'm not going to go through all the details of it. I'll talk about it at some point. But it had all these amazing details. And the weird part is I was working on some alchemical writings that I was kind of dabbling in. And like a half a year later, I got to the end of the writings, and in the end of the writings was my vision. It was all described completely at the end of the writings, but I had the dream 6 months before I read it, right? Yeah, and in the vision, I knew it was profound. But one of the things that was upsetting to me is I saw something that didn't make any sense, and I just threw up my hands. I said, well, that's it. This is just complete nonsense. You're still thinking that the brain was giving me this information, because I saw water flowing upstream. And I'm like, well, that can't happen. Water doesn't flow upstream. What is this? And so, but what I didn't realize, but the vision told me, it was spiritual water. Spiritual water is completely different. It has a different quality to it. And it wasn't until many, many years later where I realized that I saw it in some Orthodox tradition, that they go to the River Jordan on the day that Jesus was baptized, which is Ash Wednesday, it's the beginning of the fast, right? So he goes out into the desert, right? Well, at the moment that Jesus was baptized, the River Jordan reverses its direction. And what does that mean? And so what it means, and it's also something we talked about earlier, is that there was a time where we thought, when we became enlightened, like I lived all my karma, worked through all my karma, and then I became an enlightened person, and then I ascended out into the heavens. And that doesn't happen now. The ascension, all attention is focusing on this planet. It's all streaming towards us now. So the reverse has happened with the mystery of Golgotha, with the life of this person who came into this world, who transformed the direction of consciousness back into this plane of existence. So another way we can look at it is to say, hey, look, you know what? We need to be receptive. Just like you said, we need to allow the heart to lead us, because the heart is the vehicle for spiritual consciousness.
Yes.
And if the heart leads us, we're reversing the flow of information, that we can now draw the spiritual information within us. Yes. And as long as the ego doesn't interfere and get into the way, ego is receptive to that. This is what the philosopher would strive for. Philosopher means a person who loves wisdom, a lover of wisdom. And what they meant by that is they were like knights, or they were like people who understood that the correct attitude, the correct flow of wisdom was always through the divine feminine, not the divine masculine. In this realm, the divine, the woman was a channeler, the feminine, divine feminine, the mother was bringing this information in. And what we did, I've heard you say this before in some of your talk. And then what the divine masculine does is it contemplates it and it manifests it into being.
Yes,
if
it
we
gives
can
the structure to the guidance and the instructions.
structure, yes, exactly. So I think that's, at least that's what I'm striving for. And I think that as we allow time to flow, and what we're being asked to do at this point is to maintain that still point and to reverse the flow of consciousness into the correct attitude, and to reinstate the divine feminine into this realm, and to utilize egotistical energy for what it was designed to be used for, and to allow the spirit and the spiritual realm, and to emulate the divine angels, and to become more angelic and more godlike. That's what we're supposed to do.
Yes, boy, that is so true.
Yeah.
It is so true. Yes. Yes, we are to become more angelic and more godlike, and allow ourselves to have more celestial experiences. And what we're talking about is a complete inversion of what we see in many ways externally
Of the
right now.
3D reality, yes.
But it is happening. Everything gets templated vibrationally in the formless before it comes the form. And many of us are these conduits who are willing to be these alchemizer, transmuter, visioner, dreamers, who are feeling this happening and are allowing ourselves become more of that celestial, cosmic, galactic, universal, divine energy. Yeah, once more.
But you're doing this with your channeling. You're opening yourself up to the spiritual realm, and it's pouring into you. And then you go through the work of manifesting this into reality. I do the same thing in my dreams when they come.
Yes. Yes. Well, thank you. I mean, I just want to thank you. I could bathe in this forever, because this is the foreverness of us. This is our infinite nature, to be inquisitive and to be, tapping into these life-giving, renewable energies of the mother, of the feminine frequencies, versus the tiring, depleting energies, the bankrupting, if you might even say, energies of this linear masculine, distorted masculine coded energy.
Absolutely.
And so we will be back with another conversation sometime very soon, I hope. And we are gathering for a roundtable on the 14th, Valentine's Day, which is all about opening the flow of this love frequency and sacred partnership, but just even self-love and the relationship to self, and cultivating that connection is another way that we express some of this energy too. So I want to thank you for joining me, and I want to thank our audience for finding us here at Whole Soul Mastery and Color the Magic on YouTube. And you can find us on other platforms. Search for Whole Soul Mastery. And I'm just so blessed to be a part of this growing community of light seekers, of those who are willing to take that journey into our heart centers and learn to listen differently for the subtler vibrations of the universal language that lives inside our hearts and inside us as the living light. And so until next time, blessings, everyone. Blessings.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul.